The courier walked straight past reception, made a beeline for my desk, and announced loud enough for half the floor to hear that he had urgent legal documents requiring my signature. Every head in Sterling and Associates marketing firm turned toward me as I signed for the manila envelope, my hands steady even though my heart had started hammering the moment I saw the return address from Willow Creek Legal Center. I knew what this was before I even opened it. What I didn't know was that my husband Derek had chosen the most humiliating way possible to destroy our marriage, and what I absolutely could not have predicted was that his cruelty would become the catalyst for his complete unraveling. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The papers felt heavy in my hands as I pulled them from the envelope. Petition for dissolution of marriage, the header read in cold, official typeface. My name, Claire Dawson, listed as respondent. 8 years of marriage reduced to legal terminology and checkbox items. I could feel my coworkers pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Iris from the corner office had stopped mid-conversation with a client. Graham, who sat 2 desks over, had frozen with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. The humiliation burned through me like acid, but I kept my face completely neutral as I flipped through page after page of my husband's demands. He wanted the house we'd bought together in Hawthorne District. He wanted the investment accounts we'd built. He wanted his freedom, effective immediately, with a proposed settlement that would leave me with barely enough to rent a studio apartment. I walked to the bathroom on legs that didn't quite feel like my own, locked myself in a stall, and finally let myself look at the papers with clear eyes. Derek hadn't just filed for divorce. He'd constructed a narrative painting me as an absent, career-obsessed wife who'd neglected our marriage. He claimed emotional abandonment. He suggested I'd prioritize my job over our relationship. He'd even included a request for spousal support, claiming that my higher salary had allowed him to take career risks that hadn't panned out, and now he deserved compensation for the opportunities he'd sacrificed during our marriage. The audacity of it stole my breath. I was the one who'd worked 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat when his startup failed. I was the one who'd taken out a personal loan to cover his business school tuition. I was the one who'd believed in him when everyone else, including his own parents, had suggested he get a regular job with steady income. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. I assume you received the papers. My attorney will be in touch about scheduling mediation. Please don't make this difficult. The clinical tone, the assumption that I would simply accept this public humiliation and financial devastation, ignited something in me that I didn't know existed. I splashed cold water on my face, reapplied my lipstick, and walked back to my desk with my head high. Iris caught my eye and mouthed, "Are you okay?" and I nodded because what else could I do? Breaking down at work wasn't an option. Sterling and Associates was a shark tank where any sign of weakness could derail a career. I'd spent 6 years clawing my way up to senior account manager. I wasn't about to let Derek's theatrics undo everything I'd built. The rest of the day passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I sat through a campaign strategy meeting and contributed ideas for a new product launch. I reviewed creative concepts and provided feedback to junior team members. I responded to client emails with my usual efficiency. But underneath the professional facade, my mind was racing through every moment of the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed. Derek had been distant, yes, but I'd attributed that to stress over his latest business venture. He'd been spending more time at his office in Pine Ridge, but he'd claimed he was close to securing major investment funding. He'd stopped initiating physical intimacy, but after 8 years of marriage, I'd assumed that was normal. How had I been so blind? I stayed late at the office, partly because I had legitimate work to finish, partly because I couldn't face going home to the house I apparently no longer had any claim to. Around 7 in the evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my brother Leonard's name. He was a financial attorney in Charlotte, and we typically only talked on birthdays and holidays. The fact that he was calling now sent a chill down my spine. "Claire, I just got a very interesting call from a colleague at Willow Creek Legal," he said without preamble. "Someone reached out asking if I'd be willing to represent you in a divorce proceeding. I wanted to check with you before I told them to go to hell for approaching your family without your consent." The words took a moment to process. Someone had contacted my brother on my behalf, but I hadn't told anyone yet about the divorce papers. I hadn't even decided how to respond. "Who contacted you?" I asked slowly. She said her name was Nina Rodriguez and that she was a forensic accountant who'd come across some concerning financial irregularities involving your husband. She said you might need serious legal representation and that time was of the essence. Leonard's voice was tight with concern. "Claire, what the hell is going on? Do you know this woman?" I didn't know anyone named Nina Rodriguez. I'd certainly never hired a forensic accountant. My confusion must have been evident because Leonard continued, "She sent me documentation to prove she wasn't some kind of scam artist. Bank records, business filings, property transfers. Claire, if what she's showing me is accurate, Derek hasn't just filed for divorce. He's been systematically moving assets and setting up shell companies for at least 6 months. This isn't a sudden decision on his part. This is a planned financial maneuver designed to leave you with nothing." The office around me seemed to tilt sideways. Shell companies. Moved assets. 6 months of planning. While I'd been working late to afford our mortgage and his lifestyle, Derek had been constructing an escape route that would leave me destitute. "Leonard, I need you to tell me everything this Nina person showed you. Every detail. Don't leave anything out." My brother's voice shifted into professional mode, the same tone he used when he was building a case. "We need to meet in person. This isn't a conversation for the phone. Can you get to Charlotte this weekend? I have some people I need you to talk to, and we need to move fast." Derek's attorney filed a motion for expedited proceedings, which means he's trying to push this through before you have time to mount a proper defense. I hung up and sat in the dim light of my office, watching the city lights of Portland flicker on as evening deepened into night. Somewhere out there, a woman I'd never met had been investigating my husband and had taken it upon herself to contact my brother and hand him evidence of financial crimes. The whole situation felt surreal, like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Derek. "I hope you're not going to contest this. We both know the marriage has been over for a while. Let's handle this like adults." I stared at the message, at the carefully constructed reasonableness of his tone, and realized with crystal clarity that everything about Derek was constructed. The loving husband persona, the struggling entrepreneur image, the victim of my career ambition narrative. All of it was theater, and I'd been the unwitting audience. I drove home to Hawthorne District in a daze, pulling into the driveway of the craftsman-style house we'd bought 3 years ago. The house Derek now wanted to claim as solely his. The lights were on inside, and I could see movement through the kitchen window. He was home, probably expecting me to come in crying or angry, ready to engage in the emotional confrontation that would justify his narrative about our failed marriage. Instead, I sat in my car and called Leonard back. "I'm driving to Charlotte tomorrow," I told him. "Clear your weekend. I want to meet this Nina Rodriguez, and I want to understand exactly what my husband has been doing. Then I want you to help me file a response that will make him regret the day he decided to serve me divorce papers at my workplace." The front door opened and Derek appeared, backlit by the warm glow of our entryway. He walked toward my car with his hands in his pockets, his expression carefully arranged into concern. "Claire, come inside. We should talk about this like rational people." I rolled down my window just enough to speak. "I have nothing to say to you right now. I'll be gone this weekend. Don't contact me unless it's through attorneys." His face flickered with something, surprise maybe, or irritation that I wasn't following the script he'd written in his head. "Come on, don't be dramatic. This doesn't have to be a war. We can divide things fairly and move on with our lives." Fairly. The word almost made me laugh. There was nothing fair about serving your spouse with divorce papers at their workplace. Nothing fair about months of secret financial maneuvering. Nothing fair about requesting spousal support from the person who'd funded your dreams while sacrificing their own. I started my engine and backed out of the driveway, leaving Derek standing in the street with his reasonable expression and his unreasonable demands. I checked into a hotel near the airport, ordered room service I barely touched, and spent the night reading and rereading the divorce petition, looking for clues in the legal language about what Derek was really after. The flight to Charlotte the next morning felt endless. Leonard met me at the airport, and the look on his face told me everything I needed to know before he even spoke. "This is bad, Claire. Worse than I initially thought." We drove to his office in silence, and there, in his conference room, I met Nina Rodriguez. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes and an intensity that filled the room. She stood when I entered and extended her hand. "Mrs. Dawson, I know you have questions. I promise I'll answer all of them. But first, I need you to look at what I've found." She spread documents across the conference table like playing cards. Bank statements showing money transferred from our joint accounts into accounts I'd never seen. Business registrations for companies with names I didn't recognize, all listing Derek as the principal. Property records showing a condo in Harbor View that had been purchased 8 months ago, titled to one of Derek's shell companies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Credit card statements with charges at high-end restaurants and jewelry stores, none of which had resulted in gifts for me. And photographs. So many photographs. Derek with a woman I recognized as Vanessa Price, someone he'd introduced as a potential investor in his latest venture. Derek and Vanessa at Riverside Bistro. Derek and Vanessa entering the Harbor View condo. Derek and Vanessa looking at each other the way he used to look at me, back when our marriage was real. Nina's voice was steady as she walked me through the evidence. "Your husband has been planning this divorce for at least 8 months, possibly longer. He's been creating a paper trail that makes it look like his assets are tied up in failing businesses, while actually moving money into protected accounts. He purchased the Harbor View property through a shell company to keep it off the marital asset list. He's been living a double life, and he's structured everything to ensure that when the divorce is finalized, he walks away with the majority of the wealth you both built, plus spousal support from you, while you're left with the debt from his failed ventures." I looked at my brother, who was watching me with concern. "How did you find all this?" I asked Nina. "Who are you, and why are you helping me?" Nina sat down across from me, and for the first time, I saw something personal flicker across her professional demeanor. "My sister went through something similar 3 years ago. Her husband was a commercial real estate developer who spent 2 years hiding assets before filing for divorce. By the time she realized what was happening, he'd moved everything into offshore accounts and shell companies. She ended up losing her house, her savings, everything. She's still recovering financially and emotionally. When I saw the initial filing in your case, something about the structure looked familiar. I started digging, just out of curiosity at first. What I found made me angry enough to track down your family and offer my services." "So you're doing this for free? Out of the goodness of your heart?" I didn't mean for it to sound as skeptical as it did, but nothing in my life felt trustworthy anymore. Nina smiled slightly. "I'm doing this because men like your husband shouldn't get away with financial abuse. And because I've gotten very good at unraveling the kind of schemes he's running. When this is over, I'll bill you at a reduced rate. But right now, time is more valuable than money." Derek's attorney filed for expedited proceedings, which means we have less than 30 days to file a response and counter petition. If we're going to stop him, we need to move now. Leonard opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Nina and I have been working on this since yesterday. We're filing a response that contests every single item in Derek's petition. But more than that, we're filing a counter-petition that accuses him of financial fraud, asset concealment, and breach of fiduciary duty. We're requesting a forensic audit of all accounts and businesses connected to him for the past 5 years. We're asking the court to freeze all assets pending the audit. And we're demanding full restitution of any marital funds he's misappropriated, plus attorney fees and punitive damages." I stared at the documents, my mind struggling to process the scope of what they were proposing. This wasn't just responding to divorce papers. This was declaring war. Leonard must have seen the hesitation on my face because he leaned forward, his expression serious in a way I'd rarely seen from my usually easygoing brother. "Claire, I know this feels overwhelming. But you need to understand what Derek is counting on. He's counting on you being too shocked, too heartbroken, too busy with work to mount a real defense. He served you at your office specifically to humiliate you, to make you feel small and powerless. He structured the timeline to give you barely enough time to find representation, let alone build a case. Everything about his approach is designed to push you into accepting a settlement that destroys your financial future. Nina pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tabs. There's something else you need to see. These are communications between Derek and Vanessa Price. Emails, text messages, even voice memos. She slid several printed pages toward me. They've been planning more than just the divorce. They're planning to use the assets Derek is hiding to start a luxury travel company together. The business plan is already written. The trademark is already filed. They've even secured preliminary investment commitments based on financial projections that include money Derek stole from your joint accounts. I picked up one of the printed emails, dated 4 months ago. The subject line read, "Our future timeline." Derek had written to Vanessa in detail about their plans. By September, I'll have the divorce filed and the assets properly distributed. Claire won't fight it because she's too proud to air our problems publicly, and she's too focused on her career to dedicate time to legal battles. By November, we'll be free to announce our partnership, both personal and professional. By January, we launch Wanderlust Elite with the capital I've secured. The casual certainty in his tone, the way he'd reduced our 8-year marriage to an obstacle on his timeline, made my hands shake. Nina's voice cut through my rising anger. He underestimated you, Mrs. Dawson. He assumed you'd react emotionally instead of strategically. That's going to be his downfall. The evidence we have doesn't just prove he's been unfaithful. It proves he's committed fraud. The money he's using to fund this new business with Vanessa includes funds from your joint accounts that he transferred without your knowledge or consent. It includes loan proceeds that he obtained using forged documents with your signature. He's not just a cheating husband. He's a criminal. Leonard tapped the counter petition they'd prepared. When we file this, several things are going to happen very quickly. First, the court will likely grant our request for an emergency asset freeze, which means Derek won't be able to access or move any funds until the audit is complete. Second, his attorney is going to realize they've walked into a situation far more complex than a simple dissolution. Third, Derek is going to panic because suddenly he's not controlling the narrative anymore. That panic is when people make mistakes, and we'll be watching for every single one. I spent the rest of that Friday and all of Saturday in Leonard's conference room, going through every piece of evidence Nina had compiled. Bank statements showing Derek had opened accounts at 3 different institutions, all using variations of his business entity names. Property records revealing he'd purchased not just the Harbor View condo, but also a cabin in the mountains outside Portland that was titled to something called Cascade Holdings LLC. Credit reports showing he'd taken out loans totaling nearly $200,000, some of which used our home as collateral without my knowledge. Tax returns that didn't match the financial reality Nina's investigation had uncovered, suggesting Derek had been filing fraudulent documents with the IRS. The depth of the deception was staggering. This wasn't a man who'd fallen out of love and wanted a divorce. This was a man who'd spent years constructing an elaborate financial structure designed to rob me of everything we'd built together while positioning himself as the victim. Nina walked me through each document with patient precision, explaining how Derek had exploited loopholes and taken advantage of my trust. He knew you were too busy at work to monitor the accounts closely. He knew you trusted him to handle the household finances. He used that trust as a weapon. By Sunday morning, I'd signed every document Leonard and Nina had prepared. The counter petition was 47 pages long, supported by over 300 pages of exhibits. It laid out in meticulous detail every fraudulent transfer, every hidden asset, every forged signature. It requested not just a fair division of marital property, but full restitution of stolen funds, punitive damages for fraud, and a court order requiring Derek to pay my attorney fees. Leonard planned to file it first thing Monday morning, which would give Derek exactly 0 time to prepare for what was coming. I flew back to Portland Sunday evening, checking into a different hotel because I wasn't ready to face the house in Hawthorne District yet. That night, I lay awake thinking about the woman I'd been just 4 days ago. The woman who'd been blindsided by divorce papers at work and had felt humiliated and powerless. That woman no longer existed. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd seen the full scope of her husband's betrayal and had chosen to fight back with everything she had. The transformation didn't feel empowering. It felt necessary, like developing armor after realizing you'd been walking through a battlefield wearing nothing but skin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that Portland was famous for. I went to work early, before most of my colleagues, and buried myself in client projects. Around 10, my phone buzzed with a text from Leonard. Filed. The court clerk confirmed receipt. Asset freeze hearing is scheduled for Wednesday. I stared at the message, knowing that somewhere across town, Derek's attorney was probably opening the electronic filing notification and realizing their simple divorce case had just become a complex fraud investigation. The call came during my lunch break. Derek's name flashed across my screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity won out. His voice was tight with barely controlled fury when I picked up. "What the hell did you file, Claire? My attorney just called me. You're accusing me of fraud? Of forgery? Have you lost your mind?" The audacity of his outrage would have been funny if it weren't so telling. "You served me with divorce papers at my workplace, Derek. You thought I'd just sign whatever settlement you proposed and disappear quietly from your life. You were wrong." There was a long pause. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to the reasonable, measured voice he used when he was trying to manipulate a situation. "Look, I know the way I handled the initial filing was insensitive. I should have told you in person. But these accusations you're making, they're completely unfounded. The businesses I've started, the accounts I've opened, those are legitimate investments in our future." His use of "our future," when he'd literally filed for divorce, made my jaw clench. "Those businesses were funded with money you took from our joint accounts without telling me. Money you borrowed using our home as collateral without my signature. That's not investment, Derek. That's theft. You're overreacting." His voice had taken on the condescending edge I'd learned to recognize over the years. "You've always been paranoid about money. This is exactly why our marriage fell apart. You could never trust me to make financial decisions without questioning everything." The gaslighting was so familiar it almost worked. Almost. "I have documentation of every fraudulent transfer, Derek. Every forged signature. Every hidden account. My attorney has filed for a forensic audit, and there's a hearing Wednesday to freeze all the assets you've been trying to hide. So you can either work with me to resolve this honestly, or you can wait for the court to unravel everything you've built and expose exactly what you've done." The silence that followed was loaded with things neither of us said. Then Derek's voice came back, lower and harder than before. "You have no idea what you're starting, Claire. I have friends. I have connections. You think some forensic accountant and your brother are going to help you win this? I'll bury you in legal fees. I'll drag this out for years. By the time we're done, you'll have nothing left." His threats confirmed everything Nina had said about how he'd react. The mask of reasonableness had slipped, revealing the person he'd been all along. Someone who saw me as an obstacle instead of a partner. Someone who'd planned my financial destruction while sleeping next to me every night. I hung up without responding and immediately called Leonard to inform him about Derek's threats. He listened carefully, then said something that sent chills down my spine. "Good. Let him be angry. Angry people make mistakes, and we're going to document every single one. Tell me if he contacts you again. Don't engage with him directly. Everything from now on goes through attorneys." The rest of Monday and all of Tuesday passed in a strange fugue state. I moved through my work obligations with mechanical efficiency while my mind spun through everything I'd learned. My colleagues at Sterling and Associates had been carefully avoiding the topic of my divorce, but I could feel their curiosity and pity in equal measure. Iris finally cornered me Tuesday afternoon as I was leaving for the day. "Claire, I don't want to pry, but are you okay? If you need time off, if you need to scale back your accounts, just say the word. We all understand what you're going through. Her kindness almost broke through the shell I'd constructed, but I couldn't afford to crack. Not here, not now. I'm fine, Iris. Actually, I'm better than fine. Sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you turns out to be exactly what you needed. She looked uncertain about how to respond to that, so I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile and headed to my car. The asset freeze hearing Wednesday morning was held in a small courtroom at the Multnomah County Courthouse. I sat behind Leonard and Nina, watching as Derek entered with his attorney, a silver-haired man named Thomas Brennan who had a reputation for aggressive divorce litigation. Derek looked polished and confident in an expensive suit, playing the role of successful businessman wrongly accused. He didn't look at me once during the entire hearing. Leonard presented our case with clinical precision, walking the judge through the evidence of hidden accounts, fraudulent transfers, and forged documents. He showed bank statements proving Derek had moved over $400,000 out of accounts I had access to and into accounts I'd never known existed. He presented property records showing purchases made without my knowledge or consent. He displayed loan documents with signatures that a handwriting expert would later confirm were forgeries of my name. Thomas Brennan tried to argue that these were simply business transactions that Derek had every right to make as an entrepreneur, that the accounts were necessary for legitimate business purposes, that any allegations of forgery were unfounded accusations made by a bitter spouse. But Nina had done her homework too well. Every argument Brennan made, Leonard had documentation to refute. When Brennan claimed the Harbor View condo was a business investment property, Leonard produced photos of Derek and Vanessa living there as a couple, along with utility bills showing residential use. When Brennan suggested the shell companies were standard business structures, Leonard showed how those companies had no actual business operations and existed solely to hide marital assets. The judge, a woman named Patricia Vance who had a reputation for low tolerance for financial games, listened to both sides with an increasingly skeptical expression. When Leonard finished his presentation, Judge Vance looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Dawson, these are serious allegations. Do you dispute that you opened multiple bank accounts your wife had no knowledge of? Do you dispute that you purchased property title to business entities you control without informing your spouse? Do you dispute that your signature appears on loan documents alongside what appear to be forged signatures of Mrs. Dawson?" Derek stood, and I watched him deploy the charm that had once convinced me to marry him. "Your Honor, my wife and I had an understanding that I would handle our business investments. Everything I've done has been in service of building financial security for both of us. If there were miscommunications about specific transactions, that's a matter for mediation, not for court intervention in what should be a straightforward divorce proceeding." Judge Vance's expression didn't soften. "Mr. Dawson, forgery isn't a miscommunication. Asset concealment isn't a misunderstanding. Based on the evidence presented today, I'm granting the emergency motion to freeze all accounts and assets connected to you, your business entities, and any property acquired during the marriage. Nothing gets transferred, sold, or liquidated until we complete a full forensic audit." The courtroom seemed to shrink around Derek as Judge Vance delivered her ruling. I watched the color drain from his face, watched his attorney lean over to whisper something urgent in his ear, watched Derek's hands grip the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles went white. The confidence he'd walked in with had evaporated, replaced by something that looked uncomfortably close to fear. Judge Vance continued speaking, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Additionally, I'm ordering both parties to submit to depositions under oath regarding all financial transactions during the marriage. Mr. Dawson, you're prohibited from contacting Mrs. Dawson directly. All communication will go through counsel. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a status hearing on the audit progress." As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt something shift in my chest. Not triumph exactly, but a fierce satisfaction that Derek was finally facing consequences for actions he'd assumed would never catch up with him. Leonard touched my elbow gently as we walked toward the courthouse exit. That went better than I expected. Judge Vance clearly saw through Brennan's arguments. The asset freeze is going to strangle Derek's plans. He can't move forward with this travel business with Vanessa. He can't access the money he's been hiding. He's essentially frozen in place while we dismantle everything he built. Nina was waiting for us on the courthouse steps, her phone already pressed to her ear as she coordinated the next phase of her investigation. When she hung up, her expression was grim. "We have a problem. One of Derek's shell companies, the one that owns the mountain cabin, received a wire transfer of $75,000 yesterday morning. Someone helped him move money right before the hearing, which means he knew we were coming for his assets." She pulled out her tablet and showed us the transaction details. The money came from an account registered to Troy Kavanaugh. Does that name mean anything to you? Troy was Derek's business partner in his first startup, the one that had failed spectacularly 3 years ago. They'd remained friends despite the business collapse, and Troy had been a regular presence at our house for dinners and game nights. I'd always found him slightly slippery, the kind of person who had a new get-rich-quick scheme every few months, but Derek had insisted Troy was a valuable connection in the Portland business community. If Troy had helped Derek move money the day before the asset freeze hearing, it meant they'd been coordinating, which meant Troy had known about the divorce plans well before I did. Leonard's expression hardened. That's obstruction. If they were moving assets in anticipation of a court order, that's a separate legal problem. Nina, can you trace where that $75,000 originally came from? She was already typing on her tablet. Give me 2 hours. If it came from marital funds, we can petition the court to reverse the transfer and add obstruction charges to our filing. This is actually good for us. It shows Derek knows he's guilty and he's taking action to hide evidence. That kind of behavior plays very badly in front of judges. We reconvened at Leonard's hotel room, which he'd converted into a temporary war room with his laptop, multiple monitors, and stacks of documents covering every available surface. Nina worked with intense focus, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she traced financial transactions through multiple accounts and institutions. I sat on the edge of the bed, exhausted from the adrenaline of the hearing, trying to process how rapidly my life had transformed. A week ago I'd been served divorce papers at work and felt like my world was ending. Now I was part of a coordinated legal assault that had my husband trapped and scrambling. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown Portland number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was female, young, and shaking slightly. "Mrs. Dawson? This is Bethany Walsh. I work with Vanessa Price. I need to talk to you about your husband." My entire body went on alert. Leonard looked up from his laptop, sensing the shift in the room's energy. "I don't think we should be speaking directly. Anything you need to say should go through my attorney. Please, just hear me out." I put the call on speaker so Leonard and Nina could hear. Bethany's words came out in a rush. "Vanessa has been bragging at work about how she and Derek are going to start this luxury travel company together. She's been showing people the business plan, talking about how they're going to target wealthy couples who want exclusive experiences. But today something changed. She got a call from Derek and she completely freaked out. She started shredding documents and deleting files from her computer. She told me I needed to forget everything she'd ever told me about the business. When I asked what was wrong, she said you'd filed some kind of legal action that was going to ruin everything. Nina leaned toward my phone. "Bethany, this is Nina Rodriguez. I'm a forensic accountant working with Mrs. Dawson. Did Vanessa say anything specific about what documents she was destroying?" There was a pause. She was shredding bank statements and what looked like investment prospectuses. She kept saying that Derek had promised her everything was legal, that all the money was properly documented, but now she was realizing he'd lied to her about where the funds came from. She's scared, really scared. I think she's starting to understand she got involved in something criminal. Leonard jumped in. "Bethany, would you be willing to testify about what you've witnessed? About the business plans Vanessa shared, about the documents she destroyed today, about any conversations regarding the source of their funding?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't want to get sued or anything. But yeah, I'll testify." Vanessa dragged me to meetings where they talked about using investor money that apparently came from Derek's divorce settlement. She made me feel like I was part of this exciting new venture, but now I'm realizing it was all built on fraud. She doesn't deserve my loyalty. After Bethany hung up, promising to send Leonard any documentation she had access to, the three of us sat in stunned silence. Nina spoke first. Derek's entire plan is collapsing faster than I anticipated. The asset freeze means he can't fund the business. Vanessa is destroying evidence, which suggests she knows they've broken laws. Now we have a witness who can testify about their intentions and actions. This has gone from a divorce case to a potential criminal fraud investigation. Leonard was already drafting an email to the prosecutor's office. We need to get ahead of this. If Derek tries to claim he was acting alone and Vanessa was an innocent party, we need testimony proving she was a knowing participant. I walked to the hotel room window and looked out at the Portland skyline, the city I'd called home for nearly a decade, the place where I'd built my career and my marriage. Everything looked the same from this height. The streets still carried their usual traffic. The businesses still operated in their glass and steel towers. The Willamette River still wound through the downtown core, reflecting the gray afternoon sky. But my personal landscape had been completely transformed. The life I'd known a week ago had been built on foundations of lies, and now that those foundations were exposed, everything was crumbling at a speed that left me breathless. That evening I finally returned to the house in Hawthorne District. Derek's car wasn't in the driveway, and when I let myself in through the front door, the silence felt profound. I walked through rooms that suddenly looked unfamiliar, seeing them with new eyes. The furniture we'd picked out together at estate sales and antique markets. The art we'd collected during weekend trips to the coast. The kitchen where we'd cooked meals and hosted friends. All of it now felt like set pieces in a performance rather than the organic accumulation of a shared life. How much of it had been real? Had Derek ever actually loved me, or had I always been a means to an end, someone whose income and stability he could exploit while building his exit strategy? I found evidence of his hasty packing in the bedroom. Drawers left partially open, empty hangers in the closet, toiletries missing from the bathroom. He'd taken what he needed and abandoned everything else, probably moving into the Harbor View condo with Vanessa and playing house with money stolen from our joint accounts. The thought should have made me angry, but I felt oddly detached from the emotional weight of it. Maybe Nina was right. Maybe the betrayal had been so complete that I'd moved past grief into something colder and more calculating. My phone rang with a call from Iris at Sterling and Associates. Claire, I hope I'm not bothering you at home, but something happened at the office today that I thought you should know about. A man came by asking questions about you. He said he was an investigator gathering information for a legal matter. He wanted to know about your work schedule, whether you traveled for business, how much time you spent at the office. I didn't tell him anything, obviously, but I wanted you to be aware. My stomach dropped. Derek was investigating me, trying to build some kind of case that I'd been neglectful or absent. The sheer hypocrisy of it was staggering given that he'd been conducting an affair and hiding assets for months, but I shouldn't have been surprised. Leonard had warned me that Derek would fight dirty. I called Leonard immediately and relayed what Iris had told me. He swore quietly. They're trying to establish a narrative that you were an absentee spouse focused solely on your career. It's a common tactic in divorce cases where one party wants to claim emotional abandonment. We need to get ahead of this. Do you have any documentation of your contributions to the household? Emails you sent Derek about family plans, photos from time you spent together, evidence that you were engaged in the marriage? I thought back through the past few years. Derek had always been the one to suggest we skip date nights because he was too busy with work. He'd been the one to cancel vacation plans last minute. He'd been the one who'd grown distant and withdrawn. But proving that to a court would require evidence I wasn't sure I had. The next few days blurred together in a haze of legal preparation. Nina's investigation expanded in scope as she uncovered more hidden accounts and questionable transactions. Leonard coordinated with the prosecutor's office, which had opened a preliminary inquiry into Derek's financial activities based on our evidence. I continued going to work, managing client accounts and attending meetings while my private life imploded, maintaining the professional facade that had become as much armor as identity. My colleagues had stopped asking how I was doing, perhaps sensing that I didn't want sympathy or attention. I wanted to focus on work because work was something I could control when everything else was chaos. Thursday afternoon I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You need to see this," and attached was a video file. I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me download it to my laptop and press play. The video showed Derek and Vanessa at what appeared to be a business dinner with several well-dressed people I didn't recognize. Derek was presenting the Wanderlust Elite business plan, talking enthusiastically about target markets and revenue projections. But what made my blood run cold was hearing him describe his financial backing. "My ex-wife and I had a very amicable divorce," he told the potential investors. "She understood that I needed capital to pursue this opportunity, and she was generous enough to provide the initial funding as part of our settlement. It's rare to find that kind of support from a former spouse, but we both believe in moving forward positively." The lies were so smooth, so practiced, that I wondered how many times he'd delivered this pitch. He was rewriting our story before the divorce was even finalized, casting himself as the recipient of my generosity rather than the perpetrator of fraud. And these investors, whoever they were, had no reason to doubt his narrative. They saw a polished entrepreneur with a compelling business concept and apparent financial backing. They had no idea the backing he described was money he'd stolen. I forwarded the video to Leonard and Nina with a simple message that this needed to be added to our evidence file. Nina called me within minutes. "Where did you get this?" "I don't know. Someone sent it anonymously." "Do you recognize any of the people in that room?" She was quiet for a moment. "Two of them are venture capitalists I've seen at Portland business networking events. One is a commercial real estate developer. If Derek is pitching to people at that level, he's trying to secure significant investment money. And he's doing it by committing fraud. He's telling them you've agreed to fund his startup when in reality he stole the money. If they invest based on his false representations, that's securities fraud on top of everything else." The scope of Derek's criminal behavior kept expanding. What had started as a divorce case had metastasized into something that would likely involve multiple law enforcement agencies. Leonard had already briefed the prosecutor's office, and I knew they were considering charges beyond just the divorce fraud. Wire fraud for the electronic transfer of stolen funds. Forgery for the signatures on loan documents. The businesses still operated in their glass and steel towers. The Willamette River still wound through the downtown core, reflecting the gray afternoon sky. But my personal landscape had been completely transformed. The life I'd known a week ago had been built on foundations of lies, and now that those foundations were exposed, everything was crumbling at a speed that left me breathless. That evening I finally returned to the house in Hawthorne District. Derek's car wasn't in the driveway, and when I let myself in through the front door, the silence felt profound. I walked through rooms that suddenly looked unfamiliar, seeing them with new eyes. The furniture we'd picked out together at estate sales and antique markets. The art we'd collected during weekend trips to the coast. The kitchen where we'd cooked meals and hosted friends. All of it now felt like set pieces in a performance rather than the organic accumulation of a shared life. How much of it had been real? Had Derek ever actually loved me, or had I always been a means to an end, someone whose income and stability he could exploit while building his exit strategy? I found evidence of his hasty packing in the bedroom. Drawers left partially open, empty hangers in the closet, toiletries missing from the bathroom. He'd taken what he needed and abandoned everything else, probably moving into the Harbor View condo with Vanessa and playing house with money stolen from our joint accounts. The thought should have made me angry, but I felt oddly detached from the emotional weight of it. Maybe Nina was right. Maybe the betrayal had been so complete that I'd moved past grief into something colder and more calculating. My phone rang with a call from Iris at Sterling and Associates. "Claire, I hope I'm not bothering you at home, but something happened at the office today that I thought you should know about. A man came by asking questions about you. He said he was an investigator gathering information for a legal matter. He wanted to know about your work schedule, whether you traveled for business, how much time you spent at the office." I didn't tell him anything, obviously, but I wanted you to be aware. My stomach dropped. Derek was investigating me, trying to build some kind of case that I'd been neglectful or absent. The sheer hypocrisy of it was staggering given that he'd been conducting an affair and hiding assets for months, but I shouldn't have been surprised. Leonard had warned me that Derek would fight dirty. I called Leonard immediately and relayed what Iris had told me. He swore quietly. They're trying to establish a narrative that you were an absentee spouse focused solely on your career. It's a common tactic in divorce cases where one party wants to claim emotional abandonment. We need to get ahead of this. Do you have any documentation of your contributions to the household? Emails you sent Derek about family plans, photos from time you spent together, evidence that you were engaged in the marriage? I thought back through the past few years. Derek had always been the one to suggest we skip date nights because he was too busy with work. He'd been the one to cancel vacation plans last minute. He'd been the one who'd grown distant and withdrawn. But proving that to a court would require evidence I wasn't sure I had. The next few days blurred together in a haze of legal preparation. Nina's investigation expanded in scope as she uncovered more hidden accounts and questionable transactions. Leonard coordinated with the prosecutor's office, which had opened a preliminary inquiry into Derek's financial activities based on our evidence. I continued going to work, managing client accounts and attending meetings while my private life imploded, maintaining the professional facade that had become as much armor as identity. My colleagues had stopped asking how I was doing, perhaps sensing that I didn't want sympathy or attention. I wanted to focus on work because work was something I could control when everything else was chaos. Thursday afternoon I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "You need to see this," and attached was a video file. I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me download it to my laptop and press play. The video showed Derek and Vanessa at what appeared to be a business dinner with several well-dressed people I didn't recognize. Derek was presenting the Wanderlust Elite business plan, talking enthusiastically about target markets and revenue projections. But what made my blood run cold was hearing him describe his financial backing. "My ex-wife and I had a very amicable divorce," he told the potential investors. "She understood that I needed capital to pursue this opportunity, and she was generous enough to provide the initial funding as part of our settlement. It's rare to find that kind of support from a former spouse, but we both believe in moving forward positively." The lies were so smooth, so practiced, that I wondered how many times he'd delivered this pitch. He was rewriting our story before the divorce was even finalized, casting himself as the recipient of my generosity rather than the perpetrator of fraud. And these investors, whoever they were, had no reason to doubt his narrative. They saw a polished entrepreneur with a compelling business concept and apparent financial backing. They had no idea the backing he described was money he'd stolen. I forwarded the video to Leonard and Nina with a simple message that this needed to be added to our evidence file. Nina called me within minutes. "Where did you get this?" "I don't know. Someone sent it anonymously." "Do you recognize any of the people in that room?" She was quiet for a moment. "Two of them are venture capitalists I've seen at Portland business networking events. One is a commercial real estate developer. If Derek is pitching to people at that level, he's trying to secure significant investment money. And he's doing it by committing fraud. He's telling them you've agreed to fund his startup when in reality he stole the money. If they invest based on his false representations, that's securities fraud on top of everything else." The scope of Derek's criminal behavior kept expanding. What had started as a divorce case had metastasized into something that would likely involve multiple law enforcement agencies. Leonard had already briefed the prosecutor's office, and I knew they were considering charges beyond just the divorce fraud. Wire fraud for the electronic transfer of stolen funds. Forgery for the signatures on loan documents. Securities fraud for the misrepresentations to investors. My husband wasn't just a cheater. He was facing potential federal charges that could result in prison time. Friday evening I was working late at Sterling & Associates, reviewing creative concepts for a campaign launch, when Graham stopped by my desk. Most of the office had cleared out for the weekend, leaving just a skeleton crew finishing urgent projects. "Claire, can I talk to you for a minute?" His expression was serious in a way that made me tense. "What's wrong?" He pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. "I've been debating whether to tell you this all week. You know I play poker with some guys from the tech startup community, right?" I nodded, not sure where this was going. One of them mentioned last week that he'd been approached about investing in a new luxury travel company. When he described the pitch, it sounded exactly like what Derek does. So I did some digging, asked some questions. Claire, Derek has been pitching this business to at least a dozen different investor groups. He's been saying the company already has significant capital backing and they're just looking for strategic partners to accelerate growth. My hands stilled on my keyboard. How much is he trying to raise? Graham's expression was grim. Based on what my poker buddy told me, Derek's looking for $2 million in seed funding. He's offering 20% equity in exchange. He's got a whole deck with financial projections showing the company becoming profitable within 18 months. The problem is that all those projections are built on the foundation of capital that doesn't actually exist. The money he claims to have is money he stole from you, and now that those assets are frozen, his entire financial model collapses. If anyone actually invests based on his pitch, they're going to lose everything. I stared at Graham, processing what he'd just told me. Derek wasn't just trying to steal from me anymore. He was preparing to defraud investors who had no idea his financial foundation was built entirely on lies and stolen money. The audacity of it would have been impressive if it weren't so destructive. Graham, I need names. Everyone Derek has pitched to, everyone who might be considering investing. We need to warn them before they put money into something that's going to explode. Graham pulled out his phone and started scrolling through contacts. I can get you at least 5 names by tomorrow. These are people with real money, Claire. If Derek cons them out of investments, they're not going to just walk away quietly. They'll come after him legally, and probably criminally. I called Leonard immediately despite the late hour. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the television in the background at his hotel. We have a new problem. Derek's actively soliciting investments for Wanderlust Elite, claiming he has capital backing that we both know is fraudulent. He's approaching serious investors with significant money. If any of them actually invest before we can stop this, Derek's looking at federal securities fraud charges. Leonard was quiet for a long moment. How many investors are we talking about? At least a dozen that we know of. Maybe more. He's been networking aggressively, and he's apparently very convincing when he lies about where his funding came from. Leonard's voice shifted into the clipped professional tone that meant he was already strategizing. This is actually useful for our case. Every pitch he makes, every investor he approaches with false information, that's additional evidence of fraudulent intent. But you're right that we need to warn potential investors before they actually transfer money. I'll draft a notice that Nina can send to anyone Derek has contacted. We'll make it clear that any representations he's made about available capital are false and that marital assets are currently frozen pending fraud investigation. That should scare off most serious investors. The weekend passed in a blur of coordinated activity. Nina compiled a list of everyone Derek had contacted about Wanderlust Elite, using social media posts, business networking sites, and contacts Graham provided. By Sunday evening she had 23 names. Leonard drafted a carefully worded notice that laid out the basic facts without making accusations that could open us to defamation claims. The notice explained that Derek Dawson was currently involved in divorce proceedings where serious allegations of asset concealment and fraud had been raised. It stated that claims about available capital backing for any business venture should be independently verified before any investment decisions were made. It provided contact information for Leonard's office for anyone who wanted additional information. Monday morning Nina began sending the notices by certified mail and email to every potential investor on the list. By noon, Leonard's phone was ringing off the hook. Some investors were angry at Derek for wasting their time. Others were concerned about due diligence they'd failed to conduct. A few wanted to know if there was legal action they could join. One investor, a woman named Patricia Hendricks who owned a chain of boutique hotels, was particularly vocal. Mr. Dawson told me he had $300,000 in verified capital and was looking for strategic partners to scale the business nationally. He showed me financial statements and business bank accounts. Are you telling me all of that was fabricated? Leonard explained carefully that Derek had shown her accounts that existed but were funded with money that didn't belong to him, and that those accounts were now frozen by court order. Patricia's voice went cold. I was 48 hours away from transferring $150,000 into his business account. If your notice hadn't arrived when it did, would have invested in a company built on stolen money. I want to file a complaint. I want everyone who regulates this kind of behavior to know what Derek Dawson tried to do. Leonard got her contact information and promised to connect her with the prosecutor's office that was building the fraud case. By Tuesday afternoon, Derek's attorney Thomas Brennan called requesting an emergency meeting. Leonard agreed on the condition that I be present and that everything discussed be on the record. We met Wednesday morning at a neutral location, a conference room at a downtown business center that rented space by the hour. Derek arrived looking haggard, the polished confidence from the courthouse hearing completely gone. He'd lost weight in the 2 weeks since I'd been served at work. His suit looked rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Vanessa was not with him, and I wondered if she'd already abandoned ship now that the fraud was exposed. Thomas Brennan opened the meeting with a statement that felt rehearsed. My client wants to resolve this matter amicably and expeditiously. He acknowledges that there have been misunderstandings about the status of certain accounts and business entities. He's prepared to offer a revised settlement that addresses Mrs. Dawson's concerns about asset division. Leonard didn't even look up from the legal pad where he was taking notes. When Thomas Brennan tried to argue that his client had every right to travel internationally for business purposes, Judge Vance cut him off. Mr. Brennan, your client is under investigation for multiple felonies. He has demonstrably attempted to hide assets and deceive both his spouse and potential business investors. The evidence suggests he's preparing to flee the jurisdiction. I'm not inclined to give him the opportunity. She ruled that Derek's passport be surrendered immediately and that he be prohibited from traveling more than 50 miles from Portland without court approval. She also imposed additional monitoring requirements, including weekly check-ins with the court and mandatory disclosure of any new financial transactions. Derek looked like he might be sick as the judge delivered her ruling. His escape plan had been cut off before he could execute it, and now he was trapped in Portland with mounting legal problems and no clear path forward. As we left the courthouse, I saw Vanessa waiting near the entrance. She approached me directly, ignoring Nina and Leonard's presence. Mrs. Dawson, I need to talk to you. Her voice was shaking, and she looked like she'd been crying. I know you have no reason to listen to me, but I need you to understand something. I didn't know Derek was lying about where the money came from. He told me you'd agreed to the divorce, that the settlement was amicable, that the money was legally his to use. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need you to know I'm not a monster. I was lied to just like you were. I studied the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband in a condo purchased with stolen money. She looked young and scared and completely out of her depth. Whether her ignorance was genuine or calculated, I couldn't tell and didn't particularly care. Vanessa, you destroyed documents when you realized Derek had lied. You participated in investor pitches where you knew the financial backing was questionable. Maybe you didn't know everything, but you knew enough. Whether you're a monster or just someone who made terrible choices, that's something you'll have to figure out for yourself. But don't expect me to absolve you because you claim you were deceived. She flinched like I'd struck her. The prosecutor wants me to testify against Derek. They said if I cooperate fully, they might reduce the charges against me. I just wanted you to hear it from me first. I'm going to tell them everything. About the business plans, the investor meetings, the money transfers, all of it. Nina stepped forward, her voice firm. Vanessa, anything you want to say about your cooperation should go through your attorney and the prosecutor's office directly. Having this conversation with Mrs. Dawson right now is inappropriate and potentially problematic for your case. I suggest you leave. Vanessa looked at me one more time, her eyes pleading for something I wasn't willing to give, then turned and walked quickly toward the parking garage. Leonard touched my elbow gently. You handled that well. She was fishing for some kind of emotional response she could use to claim you're vindictive or unreasonable. You gave her nothing to work with. We headed back to Leonard's hotel war room, where Nina immediately began incorporating the new court orders into her ongoing investigation. The travel restrictions on Derek were going to make it much harder for him to continue any business activities, and the weekly financial disclosures would make it nearly impossible for him to move money without us knowing immediately. That evening I returned to the house in Hawthorne District one more time. I'd been avoiding it, staying in hotels and focusing on work, but I knew I needed to face the space that had held so many years of my life. I walked through each room slowly, touching furniture and remembering moments. The kitchen where we'd cooked elaborate meals for friends. The living room where we'd watched movies and made plans. The bedroom where I'd believed we were building something lasting. How had I missed the signs that it was all performance? Had there been genuine love at some point, or had Derek been calculating from the beginning? I found a box in the back of Derek's closet that I'd never seen before. Inside were journals dating back to before we were married, filled with detailed financial calculations and strategies. He'd been planning his exit from the beginning, treating our marriage like a business investment with projected returns and acceptable losses. Everything had been transactional for him, every kindness calculated, every moment of apparent affection deployed with purpose. Reading his own words confirming what I'd suspected still hurt in ways I hadn't anticipated. The trial took place 9 months after I'd been served divorce papers at work. The prosecutor's office had built an overwhelming case with Nina's financial documentation, Vanessa's testimony, and evidence from the investors Derek had tried to defraud. He was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and securities violations. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison followed by supervised release and ordered full restitution of all stolen funds plus damages. Vanessa received a lighter sentence of 18 months due to her cooperation, but her legal career was effectively over. The divorce itself was finalized 3 weeks after Derek's sentencing. Judge Vance awarded me the house, the legitimate retirement accounts, and full restitution from Derek's remaining assets after the criminal penalties were satisfied. She also ordered Derek to pay my attorney fees, which by that point had exceeded $200,000. Thomas Brennan had withdrawn from the case months earlier, and Derek's final attorney was a public defender who'd encouraged him to accept a plea bargain he'd stubbornly refused. I sold the house in Hawthorne District 6 months after the divorce was final. I couldn't live with the memories anymore, couldn't walk through rooms that reminded me of the life I'd thought I had. I bought a smaller condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, a space that was entirely mine with no history attached. Sterling and Associates promoted me to VP of Client Services, partly because I was good at my job, partly because I demonstrated grace under pressure that impressed the executives. Nina and I stayed in touch. She'd built a thriving practice helping divorce clients uncover hidden assets and financial fraud. She told me that the publicity from Derek's case had brought her dozens of new clients, people who suspected their spouses were hiding money but didn't know how to prove it. She'd helped recover millions in stolen assets and had become a sought-after expert witness in complex divorce litigation. We met for coffee once a month, comparing notes on cases and life, finding humor in the absurdity of how people rationalized betraying those they claimed to love. 2 years after everything fell apart, I was invited to speak at a legal conference about financial fraud in divorce proceedings. Standing at the podium looking out at an audience of attorneys and forensic accountants, I told my story with clinical precision. I explained how Derek had exploited my trust and professional obligations. I detailed the warning signs I'd missed because I wanted to believe in our marriage. I walked them through the investigation that exposed his crimes and the legal strategy that held him accountable. When I finished, the applause was sustained and genuine. Several attorneys approached afterward asking if I'd be willing to consult on their cases, to help other victims recognize patterns I'd learned to identify. I started a small consulting practice advising divorce attorneys on how to spot financial fraud. It wasn't about the money, though the work paid well. It was about transforming what Derek had done to me into something that could protect others. Every case I helped solve, every hidden asset I helped uncover, every victim who received justice because I shared what I'd learned, that was my real revenge. Not Derek sitting in prison, though that had its own satisfaction. My revenge was building something meaningful from the wreckage he'd left behind. 3 years after the divorce, I received a letter from Derek's prison. He'd written pages of explanations and justifications, claiming he'd never meant to hurt me, that circumstances had spiraled beyond his control, that he'd been under financial pressure I couldn't understand. He asked if I would visit him, if we could talk about what had happened, if maybe there was a path toward forgiveness. I read the letter once, filed it away, and never responded. He didn't deserve my energy or my absolution. Some betrayals were too fundamental to forgive, some damage too complete to repair. I met someone new eventually, a law professor named Marcus who taught ethics and had no patience for the kind of rationalizations Derek had specialized in. He knew my history, knew what I'd survived, and never once suggested I should move on or let go of the anger. He understood that my strength came from refusing to pretend the past hadn't happened, from integrating the experience rather than trying to forget it. We built something careful and honest together, testing every foundation before adding another layer. Looking back from the safety of distance, I could see that Derek serving me divorce papers at work had been the best thing he could have done for me. The humiliation had catalyzed a transformation I might never have undergone otherwise. I'd learned I was capable of systematic resistance, of calculated strategy, of channeling pain into purpose. The woman who'd signed for that manila envelope in front of her gossiping coworkers no longer existed. In her place was someone harder and wiser, someone who understood that justice sometimes requires you to fight with everything you have and that mercy is not always the highest virtue. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.